Bubbles, dark basement, scuttles, fingernails. Hi guys, this is Rose from the Great North Witches Collective. I'm here with your Astrology for Witches for November. And just a reminder that if you want to follow, like, or subscribe on whichever podcast app you're using, or feel free to visit us at our Facebook group, Great North Witches Collective, so you can chime in and give us your insights into things that are affecting witches today. With me, I have George and Kristen. And George was here last time. He's one of our astrologers. Kristen is a neo-witch, and we've invited her along to give us some insights into what are the more challenging things to understand about astrology, because I personally believe astrology is super important to understanding symbolism and the natural cycles of things to help improve our magic. And Kristen, as a neo-witch, is here to make sure that we make sense. So here she is.
Hi, everybody. I'm so grateful to be joining this group. I am a beginner when it comes to astrology, so I'll most likely be asking a lot of questions just to help maybe some other beginner astrologists out there understand the core concepts and different terminology, as I find people who are knowledgeable in astrology tend to exchange terms that I've never heard of and I don't know what they mean. So I'll be asking questions, also for my own benefit too.
We also have George here with us. Everyone knows him, but introduce yourself again.
Yeah, hey guys, George here again. I'm super happy to come back. I'm an astrology hobbyist, and I guess I probably described myself a little bit plainly last time, but I'm more than happy to identify as a spiritualist, like an interpretive conduit for the energies that we're about to talk to about today.
Unfortunately, we're recording in the middle of October this time, so we don't have full insight into how October went. But has anyone been feeling it this October? It's the Mars is slowing down very, very slow. So
yeah,
I'm wondering if everyone's noticing a little bit of like the heat and the tension and the some good, some bad.
I have a question. What properties does Mars tend to represent?
That's a great question.
Hi guys, Rose just cutting in here. After we finished recording, Kristen asked if maybe we could include the tarot associations with what we're talking about, because a lot more witches are familiar with tarot symbolism and meaning. I'll be interjecting as we go along just with that information. So for this one, we are talking about Mars and Gemini. And Mars is traditionally represented by the Tower card. As well, he's heavily associated with the color red. Animals like bears, crows, and scorpions. Some of the major plant associations are pepper, cumin, ginger, and he's often associated with sandalwood, dragon's blood, smells like that. And right now, he is working his way through Gemini, which is the Lover's card. Now back to George.
Mars traditionally represents themes of power and usually aggression, but also just assertiveness and just like a will force energy. Like, do you know that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh damn it, like I don't have what's in me to just get this day done. Like that's your Mars energy, right? Like in each of us, in every single human being, we have a certain capacity to just do just like not only physical work, but also to be motivated and to be inspired, right? Mars is also about that inspiration and motivation. Mars is actually based on the mythology around Aries, which, not to be conflated with the actual constellation or the sign of Aries, that's a whole different thing. It's spelled different.
You said Mars has to do with assertiveness, but then you mentioned sometimes when you get up in the morning and you feel like you don't have the energy to get through the day. I feel like those two are very conflicting.
I'm just trying to give like a sort of like an emotional color palette. Like I'm throwing them in just so that I can try to get you to understand what the vibe of Mars is, and like trying to have a little bit of like, hey, like I have to do X, Y, and Z. Sure, that's like assertiveness. But it could also deal with just literal like your physical body, like your energy, kind of like Mars is about that. Are you physically capable to actually get about your day and, do the tasks that you have to do in order for you to achieve that goal? Mars is also just kind of representative of humans in general, where we always kind of strive towards something in life, right? We hate to just kind of like sit around and not have any motivation. Our happiness and the quality of our life is better once we have a goal and task. And Mars is kind of like the engine, the jetpack to that goal.
The two symbols for Mars that I often use, because Mars was the god of war, but he was also the god of agriculture. And one symbol that's represented with Mars is the seed pushing up from the ground and spearing out of the earth, separating itself and its ambition to grow. And that's part of that Mars energy. It's not only the desire to protect, but it's also the desire to become something new. The challenge with the archetypes is that there's some crossover in different signs, and it's not all just like one thing. But Mars is that drive or ambition to go forward. And right now it's retrograding or starting to get ready to retrograde. So it's not quite there yet. But because Mars wants to go forward, it really hates when it starts having to go backwards or stop moving. Like it creates more of a buildup of energy where you just feel like you are stuck. It's really common.
Does it also bring a sense of like laziness, or just a sense of like heaviness where it's hard to get those things done when Mars is in retrograde?
Yeah, when it's stationed, sometimes the challenge is either the energy will be spits and spurts, where it's like suddenly you're super ambitious and then suddenly it's like you can't move.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really common during this sort of phase where it's like energy doesn't know what to do. So it's either not enough or too much. So yeah, laziness is actually pretty common if that's something that you're experiencing lately. But we'll get into we want to talk about the node stakes. We're just heading into eclipse season, the last bit.
I just wanted to make sure that we have the story of Rahu and Ketu.
Rahu being associated with the north node in the sky, and Ketu being associated with the south node, right?
In ancient Vedic text, Vedic relating to
the East Indian
exactly.
train of tradition.
Exactly. So in Vedic astrology, or really just Vedic mythology in general, there is this story of a clan of like these Vedic gods who are power hungry. One of them is like a dragon, and that dragon wanted to drink the elixir of immortality and sat with the other class of gods, Indian gods, who were only allowed to drink that elixir of immortality. So noticing that demon-shaped god is an asura, they cut that dragon's head in half, even after drinking the elixir of immortality. In a sense, the head of the dragon, because of the fact that it's represented with themes of greed and envy, right? Remember, because that asura wanted to drink the elixir of immortality, it's like it's very power hungry, very control hungry. That's what Rahu represents. It's kind of like wanting to have a certain area of life that you do it to a certain degree that's actually not benefiting you anymore, right? And at the other end, the body of the dragon, Ketu, is the extreme end of that, where you're actually embellishing yourself.
I was going to say there's often a loss with the tail, in the sense that it's headless, it doesn't know where it's going. So it can sometimes be draining.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the one end is very hungry and the other end is very almost lacking ambition, for lack of a better word. But yeah, sorry. No.
Yeah, so I wanted to start out with that story just so that we can get the theme of like what these connotations mean when we say Rahu and Ketu. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Rose.
And that's in traditional astrology. So they either talk about it being the dragon or they talk about it being a demon, either or. But what was interesting is when astrology got revitalized after the burning times in the what we call modern astrology, Stephen Forrest really picked up on the concepts of the north node and the south node. And what he looks at as the north node and the south node is the path of karma, or the path of your life. So in his interpretation, the north node is where you're heading, and the south node is where you're moving away from, or your past lives versus your future lives. What I find really interesting about that is, if you look at it modernly or if you look at it traditionally, the modern idea of something you're moving towards is also that Rahu energy of that desire to move towards something. So they do kind of line up. And the Ketu energy of not having energy or not knowing where to go with something is very similar to the sort of something you're leaving behind. So whether you want to look at it as a modern astrology thing or whether you want to look at it as a traditional astrology thing, they both have similar flavors of a sort of direction that you're going towards, whether you should go towards that or not. So the reason we brought up the nodes is we're in the middle of eclipse season. And the important thing about the nodes is that when the sun and the moon get near the nodes, so either for a new moon or a full moon, if they're within, I believe it's around 18 degrees, they will either do a partial or a full eclipse. Because that point is actually the intersection point between the path of the moon and the path of the sun, when they all line up, it's like they block the view of each other. So that's what those points really represent, is this lining up point of all the energy when they're all at the exact same point visually in the sky. Eclipses were one of the most important things in astrology since the beginning of astrology, because if you can imagine, when the sun or the moon suddenly turned dark, it was quite intimidating. It's very common to believe during a solar eclipse that a king will die because the sun is the symbol of the king. The moon eclipse wasn't as disastrous simply because the moon goes dark all the time for us. So it didn't feel quite as catastrophic as the sun going out, but it still seems to have the same impact of suddenly flipping energy. What I find super interesting about the eclipses is they happen in patterns of 18. When the sun and the moon are coming together or opposing each other near the nodes, it's usually got to be within 18 degrees
to make an eclipse.
These eclipses happen in patterns of 18 years. So whatever happened to you 18 years ago, that is going to be sort of a repeat theme for these eclipses. So that's a good way to kind of get a feel of what's happening with these eclipses. You look back 18 years. The last 18 is the fact that the nodes move through each sign over 18 months. So that's how long the node is in each sign. If you're using traditional astrology, it's the whole house will be how long it goes through it. So it's really important to look up your birth chart, because if you know your birth time, you can tell where the nodes are moving through. So whichever house, the eclipse will impact that house. So what that means is if you're having an eclipse in your 10th house, which is the house of jobs, this eclipse will impact your job. If you have the nodes moving through your 7th house and your 1st house, because they move in pairs, opposite pairs. So if you have them going through your 1st and 7th house, you're going to have an impact to your self opinion, your health, because it's 1st house, and then the 7th house is relationships and how you relate to other people that are important in your lives. So it is important to check your chart for this reason, because you'll have an easier time figuring out the eclipses if you actually know which house it's happening in. So that's just like a little tidbit. I know it's a lot of information, but something for you guys to consider, because especially when you're looking at your spells or how you want to figure out maybe protection spells with these eclipses, this is a good time to do protection spells for the house that they're impacting your life with. Right now we're moving into November, so we're going to talk about the eclipse on November 8th, happening at 15 degrees Taurus, and it's a lunar eclipse. And the moon is often represented by the High Priestess card, as well as being associated with things like silver and white, animals like dogs, camels, most water animals because the moon rules the ocean. We can think of plants like pomegranate, cabbage, lettuce, and mushrooms. And for incense, we often use camphor, jasmine, and myrtle. As well, the moon where the eclipse is happening in Taurus. Taurus is traditionally the Hierophant card. If you use a different deck, you might refer to him as the Pope. So what are your thoughts on this eclipse, George?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'm actually really excited to talk about this eclipse. I have a lot of things prepared for it because honestly, like if it weren't for the eclipse, honey, this would have been an incredible time to make moon magic. Yeah, exactly. Because the moon is exalted in Taurus. The moon loves being in Taurus, okay? Like Taurus is the fixed earth sign of the zodiac. So the moon is exalted in Taurus because it's almost like whenever the moon, the collective unconscious, goes through the sign that is fixed earth, the Taurus, it's almost like there is like this connection between the physical and the emotional that is so incredibly strong and stronger than any other sign. Obviously, with Cancer, I mean, you can't really can't really say that the moon acts badly in Cancer, but the moon acts even better in Taurus. That's why it's exalted.
Right, because Cancer is where the moon rules, but with Taurus, it's kind of like being put on a pedestal. It's like you're on this immaculate throne when you're exalted, like it is in Taurus.
Unfortunately, though, because of eclipse season, it's not really that great of a time to be just kind of like charging up your moon water or anything like that. And the reason why is because eclipses, they are dark, and because
And
of that,
chaotic.
and chaotic,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's a lot of tumultuous emotions that might surface. It's a time of release, not a time of harnessing. So that's why I'm saying, for all you witches out there, I'm sorry to say, but maybe yeah, obviously I'm never gonna tell you how you're going to practice your own spirituality. You do you, but I mean, obviously the most respect to all of the people who already are like incredible witches. But I feel like from the vibes from this lunar eclipse in Taurus, maybe not the best time.
I agree. Another thing that's kind of important to remember, because we can't predict eclipse energy, you're always better to be using this time to give away things or release things. What's interesting, we talked about Taurus, the moon being exalted in Taurus. The moon often represents the mother, the home. And there's a lot of reasons that makes the moon Cancer's natural ruler, which we won't dig into right now. But it makes sense to have the moon exalted in Taurus because Taurus is a really homey energy. Usually relates to people who like to be comfortable, like to have their favorite things, like to be at home. And so when you have the moon in Taurus's sign, it's really happy to be there because all the energy is working towards things we associate with home. So related to these two topics, both the eclipse, which is about letting go, and being in a sign related to home and comfort, you might want to consider taking this time to release some items in our home or go through things that we don't need anymore, because it'll come naturally and the release will be that much bigger because we're releasing things in our physical world, which plays into Taurus energy.
For those who are actually interested or use crystals within their spirituality, I would actually recommend during the Taurus lunar eclipse that you pick up a crystal associated with Taurus. And I've done a little bit of digging in, and it seems like green aventurine is actually a crystal that's good. It promotes relaxation, regeneration, and recovery. And it also, the blue kyanite, for those who use crystals, it removes physical and energetic blockages. That's great for that lunar eclipse energy. So I just wanted to just put that little nugget of information for those who might want it.
I have a question. So could you not harness I guess you said the eclipse, like it would be good for releasing things? Could you not just use it as an opportunity to release bad energy in your life?
Oh, absolutely. But the water, so with moon water, usually we collect it to put in spells to give added energy.
Okay.
So that's what the point is. It's like supercharged water. So the
Okay.
challenge with moon water from an eclipse is it's supercharged in like a unpredictable way. So it might have super energy. We just don't know what kind of energy you're going to catch.
How can you determine what kind of energy you're going to catch?
Well, you try to line everything up to benefit you. So if it was a normal full moon in Taurus, you would know that it's going to be like this powerful, really beautiful, like beautifying energy, because that's just what the moon in Taurus is like.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the moon is very much, it takes on the colors of what's around it. The moon more than most signs because it's so transient. It changes so much all the time. It's full, then it's empty. So it takes on the flavor of what it's in. When, like last time in October, I believe it was an Aries full moon. And Aries is such a warring sort of energy that the energy from that full moon will just be really different than the energy from Taurus. So the more you learn about the zodiac signs, the more you're aware of what kind of energy you're lining up with. And then astrologers will take it like another step where they'll know everything else going on with the moon and whether you should even touch that water. Because essentially what we use astrology for is birthing things into the moment. So if you think about your birth chart, it's predicting how your entire life will go. And it's not even predicting, it's representing you in your whole. So the moment you come out tells you your whole life story, which is a weird concept for people who aren't into that kind of stuff. Like, how could my birth tell my whole life? But that's what a birth chart is. So what we use astrology for is to create birth charts for anything. I mean, you could use it for knitting a sweater. I want to knit a sweater that's full of love and warmth. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to start during, a Taurus moon when the energy is, good for making something warm and comforting. And, so that's the way we use astrology is to birth things in the moment. And the more you know about astrology, the more likely you'll catch the energies you want or use the energies you want in a way that's aiming towards your goals. Then we move into, and I am super excited for this, on November 15th at 28 degrees Scorpio, Venus is going to trine Jupiter.
Oh my God. I'm actually, yeah. It's actually really interesting because the trine is going to be happening when Venus is in Scorpio and when Jupiter is retrograde in Pisces. So I know this might sound like a lot of mouth jargon, so let me just explain a little bit quickly. Whenever we say trine, we mean that planets are aspecting each other in a 60-degree angle. Is it 60 or is it 30?
Oh God, I'm the worst at this. A trine is 120 degrees.
Yeah, it is generally viewed as a favorable, harmonious angle. And the reason why is because whenever there are planets that are trining each other, that means that they are in the same element. And you know how elements in astrology, it's fire, it's water, it's air, and it's earth. So let's get into what this particular transit means. Scorpio is the sign of intense transformation, but it could also represent themes of sex and just like things that us humans we have that are almost sometimes like that Mars energy, that argumentative, because
Scorpio rules. It's ruled by Mars. That's why I'm saying that. Sorry.
Exactly. Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So there's almost going to be like a Martian Venus aspect when it connects to the Jupiter in Pisces, and where Jupiter in Pisces is actually going to be incredible for just being very creative. Again, Jupiter is like this planet of expansion, and Pisces is I wouldn't say the sign of creativity, but
spirituality.
Yeah, exactly. Pisces always has these types of themes. It's almost like the transformations that we are attracting with, because Venus is also attraction, is also complementing our spiritual inclinations. Mm-hmm. And what I would like to say to all of the witches that are listening to this podcast, try to revisit the opportunities that you had in terms of learning about your magic and creating about your magic before Jupiter moves into the sign of Aries on December 20th. So it has been in Pisces since October 28th. It's gonna be trining Venus on November 15th, but then it's gonna leave Pisces and then it's gonna enter Aries on December 20th.
And I should add in here that Jupiter is often associated with the Wheel of Fortune card or maybe the Sphinx card, depending on the deck you're using. Jupiter is a really noble energy. The colors associated with it are violet or like a dark royal blue. It's often associated with eagles and owls. And the plants you want to be considering for this transit are things like oak, beech, ash, and for any incense, you might want to consider nutmegs, clove, saffron, mace. For Venus, we have the Empress card. Venus is usually associated with some color of green. The animals associated with her are things like doves, pigeons, nightingales, and for plants, you would associate things like roses and apples, cherries, tulips, and for your incense, you might want to consider things like violet, musk, and patchouli. Right now, Jupiter is in Pisces, which is often associated with the moon card, and Venus is in Scorpio, which is usually most closely associated with the death card. We call these planets the benefics. So Venus and Jupiter are your happy, lucky, lovey planets. So when they hang out in a trine, which is a beneficial aspect, it's like all that energy is just rocking together in a really nice way. And I actually picked out for everyone, I don't know if I'll do this every time, but in astrology, we have what we call elections, where you look at the sky and you see how all the planets are lined up and you try to pick the best time possible for doing, some people do their weddings on these days, some people buy houses on these days. So the idea is you're trying to catch all that good luck. This isn't the luckiest election I've ever seen, simply because Jupiter's retrograde. Venus is in a sign that's not her best sign. But if you want to catch the most magic out of this month, I think this is the moment you're going to want in Eastern time, because obviously I can't figure out everyone's time zones. November 13th, so 2 days before they reach the height of their trine, at 8:20 p.m. This is the time I want everyone to consider doing a spell for. You have the moon in Cancer, rocking out on the ascendant, which is like your power point where we're sending energy out into the world. Yes, it's trining Venus, which is a great aspect, and it's trining Jupiter. So what we have is this called a grand water trine, which is a really good configuration of planets for just creating, expressing, manifesting. And because it's got all these planets, you can pretty much pick what you want to do. And what's really interesting is that at the very tip between Jupiter and Venus is Pluto. So we have what we call a kite shape, but what essentially it looks like is the moon is pulling back a bowstring and unloading everything towards Pluto. And Pluto is the planet of transformation. Everything is perfectly lined up to pull back your spell and release it towards what you were trying to transform towards. So I feel like this will be a really powerful time for people, definitely. So I want everyone to consider on November 13th, 8:20, which if you're in military time is 2020, and we all know how lucky our numbers are. So
2020 vision.
That's the moment to start your spell. And with astrology magic, we often talk about how it doesn't matter if you don't complete it in a certain time, it's when you birth the start of something. So whether you're lighting your candle at the beginning of the spell, or whether you're drawing a circle, whatever your way of starting your spells is, that is the moment to begin. We would love to hear in our witch group, Great North Witches Collective, if you did a spell and if it turned out. Feel free to join us there or email us at greatnorthwitches@gmail.com. Then we are on to something that's happening on November 23rd. We have Jupiter going direct, so it's leaving its retrograde. It's going to have the ability to start moving in the right direction at the same time as the new moon. It's within 15 minutes of each other. And the new moon's in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. Again, it's like I said, last month, October, might have been a little hard. We're still going to have Mars going retrograde through the next couple months, but at least we have these really nice moments happening.
I'm so excited for the Witchy Collective for this upcoming November, because Jupiter is gonna really enrich your, not only just magic in general, but also your spiritual journey as a whole. I'm really happy about the fact that Jupiter is gonna go direct in Pisces on November 23rd for all of you witchy folks, because let's think about what Pisces is like as a sign. I know that I mentioned when I was talking about the transit that was happening with Venus and Scorpio, about the fact that Pisces is kind of like a mystical, spiritual sort of area of energy, but that was when it's retrograde. So all of these types of themes, they were sort of reflective and internal. But now it's going direct. So now you're actually going to probably encounter maybe even like a spiritual leader, or maybe some spiritual awakenings, or maybe like, I guess maybe not like a eureka moment, but some sort of opportunities that get presented to you in your life that will actually enhance you as a witch. And actually you might even have a spiritual teacher that might not be completely forthcoming, because also Pisces is a little bit about kind of like dreaminess and almost like manipulation, sort of. So
the shadow side, for sure.
The shadow side of Pisces, we have to consider that. It may be that person who claims to be a very knowledgeable person in whatever spirituality you're interested in, maybe they're actually not being incredibly truthful with you. Maybe they might be pretending, maybe they might be completely recognized as a practitioner or a teacher. So just be aware of that. But otherwise, honey, it's an incredible time. Go out there, explore the world.
Another thought on the witch focus of this Jupiter going direct. I know some people like to worship deities or gods. It's not a bad time to maybe set up on your altar something towards any of the Jupiterian gods. So you have Jupiter, Zeus, Thor, which is confusing for people because of Marvel, but Thor and Zeus were often interconnected as one god. Phaethon, I may not be pronouncing that right, Phaethon. But one god that I thought was super interesting that I want to bring up, because he's Babylonian, And so that means, quite old. And this one's really interesting. The god is Marduk, and it's either spelled Marduk or Maruttuk. Am I pronouncing it wrong?
No, we just haven't.
No, you're pronouncing it very, very well. It's the Star Trek nerd in me. There's somebody in Star Trek by the name of General Martok, and he's really an incredible character. Like he's very valiant. He's an excellent warrior. He's very he has so much integrity, and he's very, very honest.
Oh, I love that.
So I just love that character and everything that he represents. So I'm like, okay, how can I weave this into this conversation?
I love that you have that association. So Marduk literally means the son of the god Utu. Babylonians talked about him as the god of creation, water, agriculture, justice, medicine, and magic. And one of my favorite stories about him, he defeated the god Tiamat, who was a saltwater goddess. In this battle, Tiamat assembled an army of dragons and monsters, and he commanded the wind to enter her body. And then he split her in half with an arrow. He literally popped her like a balloon. And then he used her body to make heaven and earth. That's a lot of cool energy to kind of work with if you want to consider working him into your altar during the new moon and Jupiter going direct on the 23rd. And otherwise, with the new moon, I think it's important. Me and George were having this discussion earlier. For me, the new moon is part of a 6-month cycle. Right now, we're doing the new moon, which is the beginning. It's when you plant the seed. It's when you start growing stuff. And then in 6 months, it's when you harvest what you've spent the time growing. So it's good to start thinking about your new moons and full moons that way. And then you were telling me about them as a 2-week period. Would you like to explain more? Sorry, I don't use that as much. So
yeah, absolutely. No worries. Well, I just like to kind of point that out because it is something of an important thing to remember, which is that, yeah, sure, we might have a new moon now, but in another 2 weeks, there's going to be a full moon. So yes, there's almost like that greater arc within the 6-month period, but there's almost like it's going to be like this mini arc of kind of the 2 weeks after that new moon. There's going to be like a culmination of some sorts that might complement the kind of greater kind of 6-month period that happens
like baby waves.
General. Exactly. Exactly.
Baby waves.
So I just wanted to let you guys know.
I love that. So usually with new moons, you want to try to work it into things that have to do with which house it's in, but also what sign it's in. So it's in Sagittarius. It's at 1 degree Sagittarius, which is a great degree to have a new moon because that's like your beginning degree. It's the first one. It's like when that energy is just starting to get pumped up. And I should point out here that Sagittarius is usually associated with the Temperance card, which I have a little bit of trouble making the connection around, simply because Temperance is about balance, and I don't necessarily find Sagittarius energy super balanced, although it's a mutable sign, which means it's very good at seeing both sides of things. So maybe finding the balance between opinions, I could see that association there.
I actually kind of like this moon in Sagittarius, especially for folks who are interested in doing, spells or maybe like charge your crystals, or just like how you said, Rose, it's 1 degree of Sagittarius, and 1 degree of a new moon is good because the light is increasing. So it's almost like your manifestations and your intentions are also increasing along with the light of the moon. And not only that, but Sagittarius as a sign, it's almost like this strong urge to get away from things. And when the moon is in Sagittarius, the moon also represents things that are kind of like daily routines, being familiar, being comfortable. So I kind of feel like for you witchy folks out there, I kind of feel like you might want to step outside of your comfort zone in this period of time because of that Sagittarius new moon. Obviously, it's all just kind of interpretation, but there's going to be this sense of restlessness for you. There's going to be this sense that's going to be hard to pin down, probably within this time. So just make sure that you're still doing your daily or like spiritual routines, as well as just kind of like obviously just routines in your other life, but especially your spiritual routines. And as long as you got that down, honey, please take advantage of this Sag new moon.
I was going to say it's a great moon for planning a vacation, especially 6 months from now when it'll accumulate into the full moon in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is, I mean, I think of them often as the roamers because they've got that horse energy. So they like to run a little wild. They like to run a little free. So definitely something to consider, either planning a trip. The other aspect that we don't talk about all the time is the spiritual aspect, which is similar to Pisces because they're both Jupiter ruled and Jupiter is a spiritual planet. So you do have that sort of desire to, like we said, with the fact that Jupiter is going direct, to find a spiritual leader, to either connect with spiritual leaders or just to find some part of your practice that touches you on a deeper level. Like it's not just that surface level of objects and things. This new moon is a good time to start something deep, and that's really going to change your life over the course of the next few months.
Yeah, and just really quickly to add, just like how you said, Jupiter is going to be direct in Pisces while the moon is in Sagittarius. So that's like, it's an incredible, beautiful kind of conversation that the moon and Jupiter are having because the moon is in the sign that Jupiter is ruling. And Jupiter, although it's not in the same sign as the moon is, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which the moon rules. So there's almost like this very harmonious energy that's associated with it that I would like for you guys to take advantage of.
Which house is the new moon in for you, George? Sorry.
Oh my God, it's gonna be in my 7th house. Hello.
Oh,
hello.
relationship time.
Yeah.
And I'm just checking Kristen's chart. Our rising sign is the same, which means that
We were born like close together, right?
no, that's
Okay.
not why. So
Okay.
so your rising sign changes every 2 hours.
Okay.
So really there's no way to like predict by birth date who's going to have the same house orientation. So what that means is I'm having this new moon in my 5th house, which is the house of creativity, expression, and children. And so are you.
Okay.
Obviously, you have the advantage of not having children. You can use this energy for creativity. Sometimes it's romance. Some people associate the 5th house with romance. It depends on kind of the modern, I find, is more about the romance of the 5th house.
Okay.
But sometimes it means something romantic is going to start in your life. Sometimes it means you're going to start a new project that's
or
creatively
maybe a new job, possibly.
well, I mean, that's for 10th house, but
Okay.
yeah, I think so. It's going to connect your 9th house, sorry, your 8th house and your 5th house. And your 8th house is the house of endings, which it sounds negative, but it's Jupiter, which is positive. So there is a possibility that it could be job related because it could be a big transformation.
I'd be happy for one job to end and then
And then
another one to
start.
begin.
There you
So
go.
that's where I'd
Absolutely.
be happy. Yes, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, you're moving around the time too. So I mean, it's a little bit later, but it's that's a big change too, really. For our last one, I chose kind of a tricky thing for people. It's a Mars trine Saturn happening on November 28th at 19 degrees Gemini. That's where the Mars is. So Saturn's in Aquarius at 19 degrees. Mars and Saturn. Okay, so we talked about Jupiter and Venus this time. We talked about our benefics, our happy, our lucky, our love planets. Mars and Saturn are often considered our malefics, which in modern astrology, we don't like to make anything negative. But what they are is the planets that make your life harder in certain ways. And the benefit of life being harder is we get stronger and we evolve. You could consider them negative because they can create challenges. We already mentioned Mars being the Tower card in Gemini, which is associated with the Lover Tarot card. And then we have it trining Saturn, which is most commonly associated with the World card or the universe, depending on the deck you're using. And some other associations are the color black is very strongly associated with Saturn. And usually we associate it with sort of negative connotation animals. So things like carrion birds, flies, snakes, toads, nocturnal animals. For plants, it's associated with some of your stronger ones like yew, belladonna, comfrey, hemlock. And for smells, it's usually associated with any kind of stinky smell. So sulfur, musk, pepperwort, anything that's considered somewhat unpleasant. And right now it is sitting in Aquarius, which is associated with the star card as well. Mars, we talked about, planet of war and the planet of ambition. And Saturn's the almost polar energy of restriction, limitation, but also structure. We have these planets working in trine, which is a positive aspect where the energy flows well.
It is a really interesting transit, almost kind of mirroring how the Venus would be trining the retrograde Jupiter. now Mars is going to be trining the retrograde Saturn, which is like such an incredible kind of like flip on that kind of narrative. So I guess what I would like to just kind of go off what you were talking about, Rose, when you were talking about the planets Mars and Saturn being malefics. Yes, they are usually attributed with, topics and themes of our lives where it's not really fun to talk about, where it's like Saturn is boundaries and constriction, and
Karma.
Mars, exactly, and Mars is obviously, like how we said, that warlike planet. So even though these two planets are malefics, I kind of see that there will be some sort of positive from it, purely because the trine is actually that harmonious aspect, like we were talking about. The retrograde Saturn in Aquarius, maybe we are reflecting on how to better build a foundation for ourselves and be really true to ourselves about the commitments, about everything we have, from work, from life, and also spiritual commitments too. So make sure that whatever kind of energy you have that's bubbling up, and again, that's the Gemini, that Mars and Gemini energy, you might be inclined to be argumentative. You might be inclined to maybe kind of coerce others to kind of believe in this certain spirituality, or believe in this certain kind of, I guess, deity that you believe in. Try to avoid that. But I kind of feel like even if you do kind of get into these arguments and conversations with people from the heat of the debate, maybe you will actually try to have a realization on how your boundaries and the foundation that you've had spiritually has actually become even better because of that inclination, because of your drive, because of your willpower as a witch, as a spiritual person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because Mars and Saturn, while considered malefics, when they're together or working together, especially when it's in a positive aspect like a trine, they're really good for the slow build. So you have to think of like an ox pulling the plow, where it's that slow, steady, never give up energy. If you want to consider doing spells on the November 28th trine, it's a really good time for doing a spell that will require you to put in effort and time to build something. And you're building something that is foundational and strong. Some people, will feel a little intimidated by the energy and overwhelmed, but this is a great time to start something where you want to make sure it comes through in the end, because it gives you the staying power when you have these two planets working together. Off the top of my head, it makes me think of doing spells for, say, starting a new business or starting a new venture that will require work, but you want to know that the foundation for what you're building will be strong. Little things to consider when Mars and Saturn are together in a trine is when they're in any aspect to each other, there's always a higher risk of broken bones and accidents, because essentially Mars is the movement and Saturn's the hard place. Essentially, you're getting smashed into things a lot more often during this transit. Just make sure if you play any like violence or competitive sports to take it easy. Careful driving. You're going to notice a lot of road rage. Not so much this, but just with Mars retrograding, it tends to create a lot more road rage. Just in general, Mars is like that. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself during this time and not really putting yourself in any high-risk situations. That's just like a safety thing, because especially being an Aquarius and Gemini, those are ruling your arms and your legs. So I'd like to keep you guys all in one piece. That's my thoughts on that. And that is our November forecast, witches. If you want to hear more, feel free to follow, like, or subscribe on whatever podcast app you're using. Otherwise, feel free to meet up with us on Facebook at the Great North Witches Collective, or email us at greatnorthwitches@gmail.com. Take care.